Hello and welcome to the Unusual Stories podcast. My name is Wojciech Salski, I'll be your host for today. And before we start, may I just remind you, if you find this podcast useful, entertaining, or in any way worthy of yours and others' time, then please do not hesitate to share it with a friend, click the follow or subscribe button, and therefore expand our growing network of wisdom-seeking individuals, because I hope that this is what this podcast stands to be. Now, in terms of other alternative ways of supporting the podcast, you can follow the link below, you can support me financially, or even just send me a message or comment on the episode, giving me a pat on the back, which is greatly appreciated. To all of you who did already do that before, thank you so much. Thank you 1,000-fold, because there are days such as this one when recording the podcast is a slight challenge, and in those days in particular it is valuable for me to get a pat on the back or a reminder why I'm doing this, not only for myself but also for someone somewhere out there. And now, in terms of why is it a difficult episode, maybe, as you might hear, I don't know, because it's a bit of a weird one when you're trying to figure out how do you sound yourself. But I've been slightly under the weather for the past few days. I'm getting out from this cold, and so my voice, my throat, does feel slightly sort of raspy, maybe. Hopefully you find that more ASMR-like or potentially entertaining. If you don't, then please pardon me, and also just pardon my energy today, which might not be as enthusiastic and eloquent as it usually is, or more often than not. It is mostly due to the fact that I've been bedridden for a few days, and this really does affect your mental health, I think. I've not been able to attend many of my usual routines and chores, and so, as you can probably relate, it's quite a challenging state to be in. And so here we are. Nevertheless, one has to do what one does, and so even though I did sort of postpone this for a few days, hoping that I will improve health-wise, the time has come to face this challenge. So today I would like to talk with you about the amazing and very much so scientific book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And if you remember, in one of the episodes before, I did allude to this book, and then I sort of second-guessed myself whether I did create an episode for this book before. And realizing that I did not, that I sort of just took a note that this is a book worth your time, and then sort of parked it in my notebook area for ideas for the future, I realized the time has come. We are somewhat in the middle of discussing books by David Hawkins, but since I'm still reading one of them that I'd like to give you a fresh view on, which will happen in a week or two, I've decided to sort of to fulfill this decision of mine from the past. And so here we are, Thinking Fast and Slow. A fun fact to start with, and that's going to be quite an explanatory one later on. A Polish version of this book is called something like Traps of One's Mind. And I think it truly encapsulates this idea as well. I understand why Daniel Kahneman went for Thinking Fast and Slow as the title, and we'll explore that in a second. But it certainly feels like a read full of analyses of the traps that our mind sort of entraps itself with in many ways. And so yeah, I think I think without further ado, I'll start by bringing it back to why Thinking Fast and Slow is a suitable title and what does that even mean. So the main idea of the book itself is that there are two brain systems, two brain modes, if you will, that we live with. One, the more fast and intuitive, is also the one that we've sort of inherited from our reptilian ancestors, and it's very much so this part, this sort of mode of our brain that sort of activates itself instantaneously, oftentimes without us realizing it's already working. It's the space, it's the mode in which you have the fight or flight response. It is the system which activates your fear or your feeling of danger. And also, as I've understood, it is the space in which we feel emotions the way we consider them to be felt. So, for example, funnily enough, it seems that the same area, the same part, the same mode of our brain experiences all the dreadful experiences of life as well as the most delightful ones. And the feeling of awe, the feeling of love, and the sort of instantaneous draw towards someone or something, or appeal, or being amazed at the attractiveness of, a view, maybe gazing at the sunset or whatever. These are all the fast and intuitive areas, lighting up systems. I think let's call them systems, as Daniel Kahneman has put it. Now, the second one is the analytical and the slow, and hence the title, Thinking Fast and Slow. And the analytical and slow is also the more challenging to dwell in. This is the part of the brain that, or the system of the brain that activates with our conscious effort when we're exerting computing power, trying to understand or, for example, elaborate on something. Funnily enough, I understand that in many ways now, me talking to you, even though I have been doing this for quite some time, and so there is a certain level of habitual intuitiveness that plays a role, I do have to exert a certain level of computing power to convey and articulate my ideas to you over this medium. So this analytical and slow system gets activated with our own effort, and it's the one that you use when you're trying to figure out your finances for a month, or maybe when you're trying to answer a question at an interview for a job, hopefully because you are actually thinking about the answer rather than sort of shooting from your hip, as they say, because that would be the fast and intuitive system coming to play. And with all the decision making that you do throughout the day, that does require you to do a certain level of thinking, or at least you push yourself to do so, maybe because the cost-benefit analysis that you have to exert is high of importance enough for you to challenge yourself with. So the interesting thing here that I've taken a note of, and I'll elaborate on that later on as well, is that funnily enough, the fast system is all about the things that feel good enough, and it is much more dependent on your character and your sort of previous experience. It's the intuitive plus habitual interlinked, and it is also the one that is the most risk averse and likely to commit mistakes just out of sheer ignorance. And I mean, it makes sense, right? You should not take really important decisions too quickly, as the the ant from Lord of the Rings, the Treebeard, said, "Don't let us be hasty." So I think this is the part where really allowing yourself to slow down and to analyze may come in handy. And we'll explore those examples in a second. But so these are the main two sort of ideas. And the book, which is not an easy read, I must say, it's like yet another of those study-heavy books. I do challenge you to read it anyhow. I think if you found this episode interesting and if you want to get to know your brain a little bit better and hence get to know yourself a little bit better, then it just sounds like a good idea. The book itself, obviously in audible form, might be a bit easier for you to digest, but I did read it on paper, and I had a chance to highlight some ideas and face them, and not only once hearing, but also sort of redrawing some notes in my notebook about them, and I found that very, very profound. And especially if you're interested in a little bit of psychology mixed with maths and statistics, then this book is a must. And the interesting part of the book itself is obviously the amalgam of different experiments that the author and his partner in crime have conducted over the years. I think the book's experiment library spans something like 15 years worth of research. So it is a gold mine of fun facts for a sort of dinner chat, or also for you to exercise your brain a little bit and think about these ideas. And ultimately, I assume the point of the book itself was to help people like me and like you to understand why sometimes we make the decisions we make, and why sometimes we think what we think and we don't realize what we don't think. And we'll talk about those biases and different traps in a second. So the major point that I've contemplated sharing with you here relates to this cognitive ease which our brain in its amazing power does on a regular, daily, every moment to moment basis. So now just take a step back for a moment and think about this. There are on average, I think, 30,000 different thoughts that you will think throughout the day. And majority of them are sort of like an inner commentary on whatever is happening. I assume some of them will also be about things that you really have to take care of, and quite a few of them, if not the majority, will be about things and ideas and, concepts that are completely irrelevant to your state of affairs, but nevertheless they might seem and feel very much so important. If you've been with the podcast for a while, or if you've had a chance to deploy some sort of mindfulness practices before, you will know by now that thoughts are not you. I mean, you are maybe thinking them in a way, but you can also choose whether or not you want to pick them up as yours. It's the way I imagine the thoughts for myself is like a cloud or a sea of thoughts around me, and I choose whether or not I have a moment when I do exercise my mindfulness practice, whether or not to choose and pick it up, sort of pick the thought and move it forward, or whether to let it go. And obviously the whole challenge of being more peaceful and calm is about letting go of the thoughts that aggravate our fast and intuitive part of the system, while allowing yourself to enjoy the the journey, the passage of time. Now, why am I talking about this? Your body is an amazing, I think by far the most exquisite sort of mechanism one can come up with on Earth. And I'm very happy to defend that in court if need be. And the idea of efficiency as your body's efficiency being the ultimate goal, efficiency and survival, is obvious to me. I hope it does feel the same to you. And when you think about things that we do and the way our body works, efficiency really plays a crucial role in keeping us healthy and sort of stable. And the same way as your nutrition, whatever you're eating, will be absorbed as good as the body manages it to be absorbed, in the same way your brain works in a way that is best to conserve energy and make the path of least resistance the most sort of used one. And it is for a reason, right? Survival is all about conserving energy. And in times, obviously, you might be privileged like myself to be living in a stable situation that allows you to eat when you need to eat, to sleep regularly, to have meaningful connections with people, and to have something that you go from day to day without having major struggles such as lack of food, lack of shelter, or lack of water. But your brain is the same brain that was used and is being used by people all around the world who are not as privileged as that, might not be as blessed as we are to be able to enjoy those. And in the same way, for your brain, even in your amazing situation as you have it, it still will do what it has to do to conserve energy and to make the easiest path for itself possible. And this is an important point because the cognitive ease brings up the problem of confirmation bias and the sort of prioritization of familiar over the challenging unfamiliar. And this is an important one. Like, think about it for a moment. When you want to learn something new, the difficulty in learning something you don't know nothing about is your brain is struggling because it cannot tie new ideas to something it has encountered and cataloged and organized inside itself in the past. That's why learning something completely new, whether it's a new sport, new hobby activity, new profession, new language, it's because there are no connections made yet, no neural pathways developed to connect, to fire and wire together those ideas. And this is also why it's much easier for you to learn a language that is similar to the one you know than to learn some language that is completely new and irrelevant to your previous experiences. And the thing here is, it plays a huge role in the same way that you judge things. You have something called confirmation bias, which plays a huge role in your day-to-day life. And now, let's talk about the usual day. You get up, you get yourself ready, you might be going to work like I do, and you go out the door, you go towards work. I might experience on my way to work 70,000 different things happening around me. But unless they are related to my ability to get to work on time, or unless they are related to something I've already established as important to me, for example, I meet a friend on the way to work who I know who's important to me, these things are irrelevant. Your brain will subconsciously, your mind will subconsciously make thousands of these decisions, cataloging what is important and what is not, and filtering through the input that comes in out there, right? So even though I might have met on the street, 30 different people walking down the street to my work, I've not noticed any of them for longer than a few seconds, and I've not given much thought to them because they are irrelevant. It would be different if someone suddenly starts shouting at me and potentially, threatens me, which not only threatens my ability to get to work on time, but it can also threaten my safety, security, and so forth. And at that point, my brain will sort of indicate that this is something you should pay attention to. And it will draw your attention, right? The attention is all about sort of pointing your awareness at something, whether looking, thinking, and so forth. Now, coming back to this idea of efficiency, in the same way as your brain is efficient prone, and in that way it makes all those decisions and concludes whether or not something is even worth considering, in the same way, you are more likely to take in new information that relates to something you already know, that confirms what you already know, than things that are sort of juxtaposed against those ideas. It is very difficult for you to take in new information that would put at risk your previous understanding of a topic. You will get frustrated, you might feel very emotionally sort of blocked, and even right now as I'm saying it, you might be sort of, shaking your head saying, no, this is not me. I will obviously take the analytical ideas and I will redraft my understanding of topic. The thing is though, you won't. I mean, over the long term, if you make an effort, if you employ this second slow and analytical mind, you might be able to. But if you allow your emotions to take hold first, and if you allow your fast system to act before the slow system is able to do anything, your confirmation bias will straight away either disregard my information as something that is not right and therefore should not be thought about, or even more so, will try to come up with reasons why I'm not right so you can defend your point. And it might sound a little bit abstract, this idea. The thing is though, in my opinion, it isn't. It's a big problem, for example, in many different areas. Let's take politics for a second. Politics brings up in people so many emotional sort of reactions that any real reasoning plays hopefully somewhat significant, but I'm reluctant to accept it as true, role in the discourse itself. It seems like politics is so loaded these days with ideas that are straight away sort of simplified into something very emotionally driven, that it's impossible, close to impossible, for us to have a conversation about politics without people becoming aggravated and without some of the reason being thrown out the window while the emotions are taking hold. The slow system cannot take place, cannot work, if the fast system is already, in full gear. And a quote here from Daniel Kahneman himself says it best, I think. A reliable way to make people believe in falsehoods is frequent repetition, because familiarity is not easily distinguished from truth. We are so wired to recognize familiar by our fast and intuitive as something relevant, that a lie told 1,000 times will become the truth. And if there was one thing that I would like you to take away from this episode, is this. Consider for a moment, whenever you're being offered a new position on a political or, professional or whatever relationship related opinion, advice, idea, whether or not your emotions get triggered enough for you to turn away from your reason and turn away from your ability to analyze what is being said. And I know that it may sound like something easy to do. I promise you it isn't. And quite frankly, I'm a victim of this all the time as well. I'm a person, usual guy, nothing special really. And in many ways, I do also find confirmation bias at play from time to time when I get a chance to observe it. The one space that I see it the most is when I'm trying to figure out a way of doing something in my sort of creative endeavor, because I find it easy, for example, to write short stories about quasi autobiographical experiences, my status quo of writing is just that. I have a certain layout. If you've had a chance to read either of my books, there is a certain layout that I follow. And because I've done it for so many times, it feels familiar to me, and therefore I'm biased towards it to the extent that for example, I struggle very much so with writing a different way. And I know this is not the best of an example. Probably the better one would be to discuss some idea that you could relate to in, I don't know, your political standing or your idea about the world. But the point here is, be aware that a confirmation bias is something you and everyone around you has to a certain degree. You might train yourself to observe it, and this is where mindfulness comes into play. But as Daniel Kahneman points out in his book, for the most part, your fast and intuitive system will be triggered if the information is familiar enough or emotionally loaded enough. And so we should also be very wary of any sort of narratives that depend on us becoming aggravated or emotionally sort of driven. And I think especially nowadays, there are elections happening in a few weeks in the United States. There have just been elections in UK. And it does seem like an election year in many ways. And politics in particular, it seems, has become so much sort of related or even based on the emotions rather than reason, that we should be very wary. Because if someone is playing on your emotions, they are much more likely, they are much more powerful in the way of manipulating you. This is really important, and we might one day do an episode about one of the books by Robert Greene, but for the time being, from this book itself, I would just say, be aware that your efficient brain, trying to make the most of the information while conserving the most amount of energy for later, is much more likely to confirm the things that it already understands and believes in, than challenge itself to understand something anew. And this is also why it's so difficult to learn. And this is also why you have to make an effort to learn. Learning doesn't just happen. Now, one really interesting thing that I wanted to talk to you about, and I did go on a tangent before, so pardon my enthusiasm, it did wake me up a little bit, is the idea of sunk costs. Now, especially if you have studied any sort of economics idea, or if you're interested in investments, maybe you did listened to the episode about money and you started thinking about your financial health and whatnot, sunk costs fallacy is not necessarily only related to financial gains and losses, but it certainly is the best way to describe it to an everyday Wojtek like myself. So I'll first, let's define it. So the definition itself, as I've written it out, is something like we hate the idea of wasting what we've already put in. And wasting it's in the sort of in the inverted commas, because this is the problem of sunk cost. Now, let me tell you a story to sort of portray it. Let's say that you've heard about this amazing 3-day workshop about whatever. Let's say you want to learn how to paint. This 3-day workshop about learning how to paint, and it's being held at your local city hall. It's gonna cost like, let's say, £500 or dollars or whatever you want to call it. And you know that it is quite a bit of money for you, but you're happy to pay for it because you want to learn how to paint, and it's really important for you to be there. So you buy yourself a ticket, and the ticket is obviously for all 3 days at the same time. And you go for the first day, and it's all right, but it's nothing special. It turns out they don't give enough time for people to ask questions. There is barely any time of actual painting. There is quite a few people just talking random things, and overall you come back from your first day at this painting workshop thinking this was a waste of time. Now, let me ask you a question. Will you go for the second or third day, or would you stay home at this point? If you're like most people, and obviously one thing is what you think you would do, another thing is what you would do actually. If you're like most people, then you're more likely to go, obviously with the hope that the second day will be better. And that's an okay reasoning. I would probably do it myself. The thing is though, at this point already, because you've invested 500 zlotys, pounds or dollars in this endeavor, and you've wasted 1 day of your time, you feel inclined to make it worth, so you're going the second day, which is fair enough. Let's assume you did go to the second day workshop, and unfortunately it's even worse. Now there is a bunch of people advertising their products, there is no painting time, you didn't learn anything at all. You even thought whether or not you should leave early so you can spend some time with your friends. Would you go for the third day now? Well, yet again, if you're like most people, then you would probably go, even not with the hope, even though you might be reasoning that you hope the third day will be the day that is worth it. The most important thing here is though, you don't want to accept your losses, and therefore you will go so you can you don't feel like you've wasted these £500. The thing is though, these £500 are already wasted, whether you accept it or not. They were wasted the moment you bought the ticket that was non-refundable. In that moment, that's done. And so instead of cutting your losses, as they say, and maybe leaving early, maybe allowing yourself to do something else that weekend, and just remembering that next time when that friend or when that company advertises this thing, you just say no, because you've invested in it financially, but as well your time. And because you don't want, this is the sunk cost fallacy, you don't want to accept these losses, you actually go and lose more. Because by now, you've not only wasted £500, pounds or dollars, but you've also wasted 1 day and second day and third day of your life. And that's basically, in a nutshell, what sunk cost fallacy means. Now, the problem with this and why it's so relevant for us is you will get yourself in situations again and again in your life when, because of a poor decision making or maybe a simple mistake, you will find yourself in places, situations, times, investments that are actually getting worse and worse. Whether it is meeting and spending time with a friend that every time, whenever you spend time with them, you feel, sort of like sucked out from your life energy. Maybe they're a bit of a drain. Maybe they're a problem. Maybe the time you spend with them is actually problematic because, I don't know, they drink too much and they get into problematic situations. Just because you have invested so much time with that friend beforehand, you are likely to consider them a worthy investment to come because you're trying not to cut your losses. You don't want to break up with that friend because that way you would have to accept that all this past time with them was wasted. Well, I hate to break it to you. It might have been, but that's okay. The thing is, though, do not continue this cycle of wasting more and more. And similarly with investments, maybe you did get this, a crazy idea that someone told you to invest in that by now is costing you money, and unfortunately you even leveraged yourself. And so by now, as time passes, you are going to be wasting more and more. You're losing more and more of your money. The thing is, it's better to stop now and accept what was lost than to allow yourself to lose more and more over time. And you will have to accept that this loss has happened. And I know it's easier said than done. I've been there myself, and I sort of shared a little bit of that story in the episode about money. But the bottom line here is we need to get to know ourselves better and be more acceptant of the fact that we will fail from time to time, and we should be able to cut our losses and move on. Whether it is with bad investments, bad friendships, or simply wasted time. The wasted time thing really hurts the most, even though you might not think about it. The only real thing you have in life is time. The minute that you've just spent listening to me, and the minute you're going to spend hopefully listening to me now, is not coming back. And I don't think in our lifetime at least, and I don't think really for next 100 years or so, I don't know, this is just a random number, but it doesn't seem obvious to me that humankind will be able to stop time and sort of stop the slow but steady decay of our bodies. One day we will all be dead, and therefore you should treat your time as preciously as you can. And it's not an under or an overstatement. I really truly believe that you should think twice about the way you spend your time. It is the worst kind of experience whenever I'm thinking back to certain parts of my life. I do find that even though I might have a reason why that time was not wasted, there are periods in my life which seem to me like I've sort of allowed them to be wasted because of my maybe lack of understanding to the meaning and importance and prioritization in life. And that's okay. I mean, I'm on a journey. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for maybe those few years in, let's say, high school or secondary school, where I might have made some mistakes. The point is, though, the moment you realize you're wasting time, whether with something you do or in a place you are or with someone that you're dating or, being friends with or whatever, cut your losses and go. Don't allow yourself to waste more of it. And remember that sunk cost fallacy might be something that is affecting you. And this is really, really important stuff, guys. Really respect your time. Even if that means right now, click the pause button and, I don't know, take off your headphones and spend the time you have with your loved one next to you. If you're listening to this while they are sitting on their phone doing something else. Because time is all we have. And it might be a bit morbid, this idea, but it can also be very empowering one. There is nothing as motivating as realization that there is not much time left. So you better start enjoying it. Now, finally, at the very end, I wanted to share with you a few other fun thoughts and fun facts that the book offers us. And I'll start with the anchoring bias and the anchor effect, which was really interesting. I recently had a chance to discuss it during one of our workshops at my new job. And this interesting phenomenon that our mind traps itself with in obviously the fast and intuitive system is the fact that we tend to anchor things, numbers, ideas, to things that are completely irrelevant, but because of this anchoring, we might come with conclusions and come up with solutions that are, faulty because of this anchoring effect. So let me portray it. One of the experiments that Daniel Kahneman, presented in his book was the experiment they did when you would come, the participant would come to the room and they would first roll the dice. And after rolling the dice, they would be asked some sort of a question. Let's say that you come into the room and I ask you to roll the dice. The dice is rolled, it's 5. And then the question might be, how many people do you think live in Florida? And in the state of Florida. And apparently, turns out that our anchoring bias can make this connection with, between things or phenomenons or numbers that are completely irrelevant and therefore jump to wrong conclusions. So, for example, in this situation, because I rolled 5, I might tell you that there are 15,000 people living in Florida, whatever, it doesn't matter. The thing is, though, they found that again and again, people would, for example, people that rolled higher numbers on the dice would make consecutively higher predictions on the questions they were asked. And in a similar way, people who rolled lower numbers on the dice would call out lower numbers of these predictions. And the point here made is, be careful of your anchoring effect. Be careful of your anchoring bias. And it's easier said than done, once again. It is for a reason your mind's trap. Because your fast and intuitive sort of system is likely to make mistakes if you don't allow your slow and analytical to take a moment and reflect on facts and really understand the question. And this is, I guess, especially important if a part of your job is about either predicting, analyzing, or calculating things. Because if you allow yourself to, for example, be distracted with a certain advertisement on your phone while you're scrolling through social media, just before you make an evaluation of a company, you might find yourself trapped with the anchoring effect in play, making a prediction that is over or understated only because the advertisement told you about this great new opportunity or the major losses in the economy of another country. These are obviously just absurd examples, but the main point here is your mind is likely to make connections where there are not any, or at least not any making sense. And therefore, you should be really, really wary of making sort of off-the-hip conclusions of ideas before you really employ your analytical and slow system to come and play. Now, the second one is something very relevant to what I'm trying to do in this podcast, and I hope I manage in some way, is this idea that if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it. There is an interesting phenomenon that has been observed again and again, that the best way to learn yourself, to sort of strengthen your learning, is to teach another person. Whether it's training, some sort of sports, or whether it is really learning and teaching someone, a language or some sort of a course, maybe maths, whatever. The point here is, if you cannot explain something in simple terms so another person can understand, it means that you're likely not able to understand it yourself. And, it can be especially problematic when you hide behind a jargon or technical language because your ego is trying to sort of puff up and prove to the person you're speaking with that you understand, while you're not actually able to convey it in terms that are available for a 7-year-old kid to understand. And this can be quite a challenge. I find it to be a challenge sometimes. Quite frankly, this book is probably not the easiest for me to discuss, because in many ways there are ideas here that I'm still trying to grasp. And I can imagine that you've had your fair share of experiences as well, when even though you understand something, the moment you're trying to explain it to another, you sort of come short or maybe you don't realize what you don't know, and so what you do know is not enough for you to make a proper explanation. So just remember, if you can't put something in simple terms and explain it, then you probably don't understand it. And maybe this is a good invitation for you to reflect whether or not there are some ideas that you sort of think you understand, but you wouldn't be able to explain it to your spouse or to your kid. And therefore, maybe first and foremost, try to understand it better before you criticize the world, as Jordan Peterson said. Now, an final interesting idea that I wanted to share with you is this halo effect, which is basically a tendency to like or dislike everything about a person, including things you have not observed, you have no idea about. And I think this is particularly relevant to celebrity and sort of stardom, and maybe sort of role model worship ideas. I bet you've had this experience before, and if you haven't, then I'm pretty sure you will at some point in your life, when you realize, after being so in love with someone's idea, not with the person themselves, but with your idea of how they are, or so sort of amazed at someone, and then you get to meet them in person, it turns out it's not so great, or maybe they tell you something about themselves that makes you realize you don't know how hard it is for them. The thing is, first of all, we simplify things all the time. Our fast and intuitive system is obviously favorable for the efficient mind, and so it is more likely for you to judge based on few seconds worth of ideas, rather than to analyze and slowly and critically evaluate the person you've just met. And the halo effect works both in a negative and positive. You might find that, for example, you don't like someone's attitude towards something, and the halo effect will sort of empower your dislike to the point that you start to realize or feel like you don't like anything about them, like everything annoys you about them, and so forth. And similarly, you can be so amazed that someone, even though you just know them from one activity or from one situation, or maybe from one glance, that you idolize them and you expect them to be much better, much more than they really are. A good example here might be me and you. Even you might be watching this on the video, you might be listening to it like the majority of people does. There is only so much you know about me based on what I'm sharing in the podcast. You've not had a chance, maybe you did, I don't know, but I assume the majority of you haven't had a chance to get to meet me in person or to engage with me in an activity that is different than this. And believe me, there are many things that you might expect about me to be true that are not, and there may be quite a few things that you would never think about me that are really true and relevant. So, this applies to anyone, anywhere, and any idea, anywhere. We tend to simplify, and we tend to sort of make things more efficiently familiar to ourselves, and so we might also apply this halo effect subconsciously and judge, and therefore draw conclusions that are obviously a little bit out of whack. And I think this is an interesting thing to note and to remember, and maybe to humble yourself with from time to time, because there is this classic image that I've heard somewhere again and again, that you might look at someone driving past you. Let's say that you're struggling financially, and this guy drives past you in a Ferrari with a beautiful woman next to him, and you're thinking like, oh my God, this guy must have it all. He's like, I want to be like him in so many ways. Fair enough, maybe that's the truth, but it might also be that the guy is struggling with some sort of awful drug addiction. That woman next to him is actually a sex worker and not his true love. And he might be drowning in debts and being, I don't know, pursued by the local mafia. And he might be a completely depressed dude. It's so difficult to understand and to see people for who they really are because of our confirmation biases and our judgments and our subconscious opinions that are formed, that it really is something powerful when you make a conscious effort to try and not judge, rather to try and understand the person, especially if you meet them face to face. And I guess this is an invitation for you to do so. Next time you meet someone new, observe for a moment whatever they seem to be, making you feel, like we've talked about it last week, about the intuitive feeling, but then make a conscious effort, if you want and if you have time, to really get to know them, or at least to get to know them to the point that you can say whether or not your judgment was a suitable one. And I think overall it's a good humbling expertise and exercise to give yourself. Now, in terms of the invitation for the episode itself, the whole one, and obviously I've given you quite a few, so pardon me, I did pick up the speed. I'm really happy that my illness did not affect this episode as much as I thought it will. The invitation I've prepared for you is is just that. Consider one of these ideas that we've talked about, whether the confirmation bias or the cognitive ease, maybe the sunk cost fallacy, or the anchoring effect and an anchoring bias, or maybe the halo effect, or maybe the idea that you might not actually be able to understand something unless you are able to put it in simple layman's terms. And ask yourself, when was the last time one of these has affected you? Or maybe, in what situations do you find yourself being affected by those? And as you go throughout your week, these coming days, and hopefully month, year, life, as you pass your time, hopefully in the way that you would like to pass it, reflect on those ideas often, and hopefully this will help you to become a better person, a better whoever you already are. Whether it is to become a better partner or a better friend or a better employee or a better creative, whatever that is. Consider how they affect you, and consider whether or not there are some ideas and areas in your life where you could apply the knowledge from Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, and put it into place, put it to work. Now, I could not stress enough, this is just a sort of a scratch on the surface. If there are some books that I would urge you to read, this is one of them for sure. It's very scientific driven, it's very interesting, it's very relevant, it's very much so about you and me. So please, if you found this episode interesting, then give this book a read. Other than that, have a wonderful, wonderful week. Stay happy, stay healthy, and I'll see you next time.